This is working. Yeah? Right. I would like to bring a perspective to your day without knowing what the people said this morning. So if it's repetitious, throw a bun at me, and if it's new, I hope you won't fall asleep. And what I would like to do is give a bit of a story, a history about 2017, and then provide some sort of suggestions or ideas about 2017. And hopefully I'll do that as succinctly as possible, although retired generals are not known for being brief, but I'll work on that. Let me give you first a bit of history. The year is 2007, and it's a Wednesday morning during the period that Parliament is sitting. And on Wednesday mornings, you have what is called caucus meetings on Parliament Hill. So what happens then is the senators and the MPs get together by region, provincial or region, and then after that, they get together by party, nationally. And all this is done, of course, by party. And so you get a couple hours of, let's say I'm Liberal in Quebec, we all meet, the Quebec gang. Then after that, we go to the National Caucus where all the Liberals are there. So there's about 2 hours of that every Wednesday morning at the national level. And that's when you can raise points, and the leaders are there and all the rest of your colleagues are there. I'm not a political person, so I don't really get engaged so much in the strategizing of political things. I must tell you that they call it strategy, but it's pretty low-level tactics on what's going to happen next week sort of thing. However, if you do stand up, you are allowed 3 minutes. So on this date in 2017, I asked to speak, and I went to the microphone and I said, "What's special about the number 2017?" And then I asked the question, "What's special about the year 2017?" And there was no response. So I said, the year 2017 is going to be the 150th anniversary of one of the most stable democracies in the world. Out of the 193 countries, this country is by far one of the most stable democracies in the whole world. But I said it's also going to be the year, well, we will recognize, I hope, the 100th anniversary of when the youth of this nation crossed the pond, fought, bled, died, and won a victory that moved this colonial cousin, as we were recognized at the time, into a nation state by paying the price in blood, as nation states have been structured for centuries, and that was Vimy Ridge. So you got this year where you got the 150th where the country has been created and has reflected this enormous stability, and it's also the 100th anniversary where it paid the price of becoming that nation state and being recognized as that. So I said, what's the plan? I mean, what do we got planned to culminate in 2017? There was no answer. But I said there's a more important question than that. Remembering that this is not an insignificant date. This is a date where you got to think big, when you got to think significant. So I said, what is going to be the plan of Canada beyond 2017? What is our strategic vision? What do we want to give as a focus to our youth to maximize our potential beyond 2017? Where do we want to go with this country amongst all the other countries and the complexities and ambiguities of the world? How do we want to thrive? There were no answers. So in 2011, we had a federal election again, and I had the opportunity a couple months after to go back to the podium and ask exactly the same questions and got exactly the same answers. And if, I'm sure you have, read all the federal political parties' platforms at the last election, only 2 of them actually wrote that we will celebrate the 150th anniversary. Didn't even mention Vimy Ridge. We will celebrate the 150th anniversary. And that is the strategic guidance leadership that we're getting, which is essentially nothing. Nothing at such an incredibly significant time where at no other time can we bring those 2 components together to really articulate ourselves into the future. So we don't have much time left. If it was 2007, I think we could say, well, a 4-lane highway across this country might be a start. Or we're going to have a high-speed train from Halifax to Vancouver that will start and take 40 years to build. But we want to have this country linked by another means than simply aircraft, and why not a high-speed train? It's only an engineering problem. Of course, a few dollars, but it's an engineering problem. So what else is there now that we have barely 4 years left? And so you are either going to be concentrating on what you want to culminate in 2017 or on what you want to start in 2017. 2 different exercises. I do believe that we can do better than building a bunch of rinks across the country or parks. And I think that the argument presented earlier on that we don't necessarily want to build a whole bunch of buildings as such, and maybe repairing what we did 50 years ago wouldn't be a bad idea. And so that pragmatic, practical outlook makes a lot of sense. And I would say that's a good plan to get us to 2017, so that we have it all dickied up and painted up and resorted out. But can we go beyond that? And can we, in fact, bring something to give us an impetus for the future? And this is what I've been sort of pondering. More than what to culminate in 2017 is what's to start in 2017. Strategically. Not just locally. Locally, there will be all kinds of plans, apart from the parties and the cakes and everything else. But strategically, where do we want this country to go? What do we want to give as guidance to our youth? What sort of reference do we want to have? So I threw up a few ideas. One was, if it's the 100th anniversary where the youth of this nation, and remember there was a whole position about the youth, those who fought in 1917 at Vimy Ridge were 16, 17, 18, and 19. They were the bulk of the nearly 600,000 youth of this nation that fought in World War I. And we got that incredible monument sitting up there in Vimy that some of you might have visited. And a few years back, I was part of the reconstruction of the monument. And so what we did is we rejuvenated it, but then we got enough money, the federal government, I was part of a committee helping the federal government with that. Veterans Canada was the lead, to buy enough of the Croatian marble that comes from one very specific site to be able to be rejuvenating that monument 60, 70 years down the road. So not only did we rejuvenate it now, but we bought enough that we put into the catacombs underneath, in the vaults underneath the monument for 60 years down the road. But why leave Vimy over there? Why not use that as a reference to show that the youth of this nation paid these sacrifices of the past, and that we will want them to be engaged in the leadership of our future? So why not try to repatriate Vimy Ridge to Canada? So of course when I said that the first time, people said, you don't want to build that big monument here in Canada, and of course not. But you can do something like take one of the 7 statues that's on it, reproduce it in that same marble, incredibly white marble, to a 2-3 times life size, and put it somewhere where politicians and leadership of this country cannot miss it, and remind them that there is a price that the youth have paid and will pay into the future as this country continues to engage itself in the world. So bring something, replicate something there of Vimy Ridge, so that it's a reference point for the future, not simply a commemoration of the past. Well, that's an idea. But can we do much more than that? Well, there is a problem in our country where we are maybe a bit immature about our past in order to build our future. Let me give you the example of why some things simply won't get off the ground. I live in Quebec City. In 2009, it was a significant year. Why? Because it was the 250th anniversary of the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Not an insignificant moment in the history of this nation. At that battle, in the weeks before it, and in the immediate aftermath and during the battle, hundreds upon hundreds of French soldiers were killed. Hundreds upon hundreds of British soldiers were killed. Hundreds upon hundreds of Canadian militia were killed and injured. Hundreds of Aboriginal people, First Nation people mostly, were injured and killed, and a whole whack of families were dispossessed as their farms and homes and so on were burned. They're buried right there in Quebec City. The generals that were there, one of them is buried there also. So in 2007, I went to the political leadership and I said, what are we going to do to commemorate 2009, that is to say, the 250th of battle? And there were no takers. No one wanted to touch it. Not one political person wanted to touch that thing. And so we abandoned the battlefield to some pretty extremist wackos who did some pretty stupid things. But it was a reflection that we didn't want to celebrate who won and who lost. We said we got to commemorate the sacrifices of all sides on that occasion. And there wasn't a politician that had the guts to raise that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is still a sign of an enormous immaturity of this nation in regards to its history. Same scenario with our First Nations throughout. So, how do you then move to mature the country or influence? I think one aspect that we might want to look at is, where do we situate us in the world? We tend to look locally and provincially, sometimes nationally. But we are in an era of revolution of communications where we can be connected with nearly anyone in the world. We could probably soon Skype anybody in the world. And we have a generation, the ones under 25, who are mastering that technology and who are able to coalesce like never before to exchange information. We've seen it happen in a number of scenarios, often use the Arab Spring and others as an instrument of showing how you can bring people together and move significantly. So we've got this revolution of communications there, and we've got a youth that are ready to maximize it. From the age of 10, 11, they can maximize it. So I've sort of articulated that maybe what we're seeing in front of us is a whole different generation. Maybe they're the generation, not the X or the Y or the Z, but maybe they're the generation without borders. Because they're worldwide. They maximize the web. And if they're worldwide, and if they come from a country that has so much potential and capability, then why are we holding them back? Why aren't we pushing that extraordinary mastery of technology, work ethic, belief in human rights, no desire to subjugate anyone, although we haven't solved our First Nations yet? So why not give an impetus to our youth to articulate where it wants us to go beyond 2017? Prepare the thinking, the strategic focus of where we see this leading middle power in the world situate itself to maximize what's inside it for the world, for humanity, for the advancement of humanity as a leading power in the world, and not simply as an occasional participant. And so I thought that one thing we want to do is try to instill in all our different structures a concept of establishing a rite of passage. And we say a rite of passage into adulthood in this country, after high school, after an undergraduate degree, after a community college degree, is that you have underneath your bed a pair of boots or sneakers that have been dirtied or sullied on the earth of a developing country, where our youth went a week, a month, 6 months, joined an NGO, created an NGO, offered up their services over there, and where they went and saw, heard, smelled, touched what is happening to 80% of humanity, and that they bring that experience back, and that it influences them as they continue to mature and take their place in this great nation and evolve it into the future. I'm not saying create a Peace Corps. I'm not saying create Katimavik. I'm saying create an atmosphere, create a culture, create a need, encourage them to maneuver whatever they need to go and not visit Europe. Europe's going to be there all the time. And anyways, most of that stuff was built on the backs of people who never really got the recognition. So no, don't worry about Europe. Go to where 80% of humanity lives and recognize that you're part of the 20% of the haves, and see what you can bring back from that to significantly refocus this nation and maximize its potential into the future. Create a concept of rite of passage based on us and the world, and how we are part of the evolution and potentially a leadership role in the world, and do it through the maturing of our youth in that knowledge and that experience, and they will influence us. And so there are a few other scenarios of this nature. And what I hope with this seance and the other ones the team is doing is that because we're not getting any political leadership, and the small committee that's sitting looking at the 150th is essentially looking at how do we commemorate, which is nice. They don't even mention Vimy. They don't even mention the youth of this nation in the past made us a nation state in their blood. Don't even mention that. I think that the leadership has got to come from us, from the people, from the business world, from those of you who are in leadership roles, from the education system, and so on. And we help them articulate something much grander than simply building some buildings and putting some trees in some parks. And so when you're thinking of this, think of the scale of what can be done in this incredibly unusual and very unique circumstance that this country is going to live in that year. And enjoy it. Enjoy that experience of seeing a nation realign itself to rejuvenate and situate itself in a sort of vision of what it wants to be, that it has never articulated since when Wilfrid Laurier, at the turn of the previous century in 1900, said that was, or this would be, the century of Canada. Well, we haven't achieved that. We've done some magnificent work, but we have not achieved the full potential of this country, and we have never, ever punched above our weight except in World War II and in World War I, when the youth of this nation, in both occasions, paid the ultimate price to establish ourselves. So maybe you want to go back to that and look at it in that perspective. Thank you very much.